It feels like the world has been a little crazy lately, so let's just all have a nice cup of tea.
Oh, come on, that's lovely.
Literally, because that's the title of one of the essays. The other one is more succinctly entitled Tea.
2 lumps, Uncle Albert?
Yes, please.
We'll be joined this evening, you see there with his ingsoc mug, we have Mr. George Orwell, also known as Eric Blair. And then we also have, with his very appropriate Don't Panic mug, we've got Douglas Adams. It is sometimes extremely difficult to extract opinions from the British. I did discover that the best way to extract opinions from the British is to talk about the weather or tea. So one question that will always get them going is the best tea brand. There's many, many good ones. And it just sort of depends on your tastes, but people tend to be very brand loyal to their teas. Also, the amount of time that the tea should brew. This is a hotly contested topic, and it's literally the origin of the phrase, not my cup of tea. The best biscuit. And what you mean by best can vary wildly. The best one for dunking, the best one for nibbling. Also hotly contested topics. Should you dunk your biscuit in the tea, or do you nibble it and take a sip of the tea? And one question that I find I can get Brits going on and on and on about for ages, custard creams or bourbon creams. I was corrected that it's not bourbon creams, it's bourbon or bourbon, even depending on your dialect. I know I said it wrong, and I would love to hear from you. I want fierce opinions on all of this, okay? Let's start with our first essay, which is A Nice Cup of Tea by George Orwell.
Let's have a nice hot cup of tea.
This was published in the London Evening Standard on the 12th of January, 1946. Get very cozy. I hope you've got a comfy chair to sit in and a nice cup of tea to sip. If you look up tea in the first cookery book that comes to hand, you will probably find that it is unmentioned, or at most you will find a few lines of sketchy instructions which give no ruling on several of the most important points. This is curious. Not only because tea is one of the mainstays of civilization in this country, as well as in Eire, Australia, and New Zealand, but because the best manner of making it is the subject of violent disputes. When I look through my own recipe for the perfect cup of tea, I find no fewer than 11 outstanding points. On perhaps 2 of them there would be pretty general agreement, but at least 4 others are acutely controversial. Here are my own 11 rules, every one of which I regard as golden. First of all, one should use Indian or Ceylonese tea. China tea has virtues which are not to be despised nowadays. It is economical and one can drink it without milk, but there is not much stimulation in it. One does not feel wiser, braver, or more optimistic after drinking it. Anyone who has used that comforting phrase, a nice cup of tea, invariably means Indian tea. Secondly, tea should be made in small quantities, that is, in a teapot. Tea out of an urn is always tasteless, while army tea made in a cauldron tastes of grease and whitewash. The teapot should be made of china or earthenware. Silver or Britannia-ware teapots produce inferior tea, and enamel pots are worse. Though, curiously enough, a pewter teapot, a rarity nowadays, is not so bad. Thirdly, the pot should be warmed beforehand. This is better done by placing it on the hob than by the usual method of swilling it out with hot water. Fourthly, the tea should be strong. For a pot holding a quart, if you are going to fill it nearly to the brim, 6 heaped teaspoons would be about right. In a time of rationing, this is not an idea that can be realized on every day of the week, but I maintain that 1 strong cup of tea is better than 20 weak ones. All true tea lovers not only like their tea strong, but like it a little stronger with each year that passes, a fact which is recognized in the extra ration issued to old age pensioners. Fifthly, the tea should be put straight into the pot. No strainers, muslin bags, or other devices to imprison the tea. In some countries, teapots are fitted with little dangling baskets under the spout to catch the stray leaves, which are supposed to be harmful. Actually, one can swallow tea leaves in considerable quantities without ill effect, and if the tea is not loose in the pot, it never infuses properly. Sixthly, one should take the teapot to the kettle and not the other way about. The water should be actually boiling at the moment of impact, which means that one should keep it on the flame while one pours. Some people add that one should only use water that has been freshly brought to the boil, but I have never noticed that it makes any difference. Seventhly, after making the tea, one should stir it, or better, give the pot a good shake, afterwards allowing the leaves to settle. Eighthly, one should drink out of a good breakfast cup, that is, the cylindrical type of cup, not the flat, shallow type. The breakfast cup holds more, and with the other kind, one's tea is always half cold before one has well started on it. Ninthly, one should pour the cream off the milk before using it for tea. Milk that is too creamy always gives tea a sickly taste. Tenthly, one should pour tea into the cup first. This is one of the most controversial points of all. Indeed, in every family in Britain, there are probably two schools of thought on the subject. The milk first school can bring forward some fairly strong arguments, but I maintain that my own argument is unanswerable. This is that by putting the tea in first and stirring as one pours, one can exactly regulate the amount of milk, whereas one is liable to put in too much milk if one does it the other way round. Lastly, tea, unless one is drinking it in the Russian style, should be drunk without sugar. I know very well that I am in a minority here, but still, how can you call yourself a true tea lover if you destroy the flavor of your tea by putting sugar in it? It would be equally reasonable to put in pepper or salt. Tea is meant to be bitter, just as beer is meant to be bitter. If you sweeten it, you are no longer tasting the tea, you are merely tasting the sugar. You could make a very similar drink by dissolving sugar in plain hot water. Some people would answer that they don't like tea in itself, that they only drink it in order to be warmed and stimulated, and they need sugar to take the taste away. To those misguided people, I would say, try drinking tea without sugar for, say, a fortnight, and it is very unlikely that you will ever want to ruin your tea by sweetening it again. These are not the only controversial points to arise in connection with tea drinking, but they are sufficient to show how subtilized the whole business has become. There is also the mysterious social etiquette surrounding the teapot. Why is it considered vulgar to drink out of your saucer, for instance? And much might be written about the subsidiary uses of tea leaves, such as telling fortunes, predicting the arrival of visitors, feeding rabbits, healing burns, and sweeping the carpet. It is worth paying attention to such details as warming the pot and using water that is really boiling, so as to make quite sure of wringing out of one's ration the 20 good, strong cups that 2 ounces, properly handled, ought to represent. That is just a beautiful piece of writing. You could ask kids to do something similar. Ask them to write an essay explaining the correct way to do something. It could be making a sandwich. It could be pumping the tire on a bicycle, something, but some common activity. And then especially if that activity has particular ways that it can be done, and then the kid could argue that. I mean, shoot, you could do it too. I'd love to read some fun essays from any of you. This is such an interesting artifact, this whole essay, because it was written right at the end of World War II. So he's referring to technology that's out of date, as well as kind of the political situation. One thing a lot of people outside Britain don't know is that rationing continued until the 50s. And so until 1952, tea was still rationed. Even though the war had ended, Brits pretty much were still living in wartime circumstances because it took a while to put their country back together. So back at the beginning, he mentioned tea not just in Britain, but in other countries. And he used the word éire, so E-I-R-E, which is the Gaelic name for Ireland. And this shows his political support for Irish independence, because that's the Irish name for the nation, whereas the imposed English name for the nation is Ireland. I think when he's referring to the distinction between Indian and Chinese tea at the beginning, I think what he's talking about is the difference between black and green tea. And green tea is delicious, but it is less strong. It's also possible that Orwell was biased as he was born in India. He mentions Britannia ware. It's a type of pewter that's been electrocoated in silver, so kind of a cheaper form, and if you can't afford a full silver teapot. And he seems to think that these produce inferior tea. This is where, if any of you know about maybe like the heat conduction properties, I wonder if silver teapots don't retain heat. The mug that he was referring to as well, this is Staffordshire pottery, made in England, and this is what he means by like the breakfast mug. And it's true, because if you have those fancy little china cups, the heat does disperse a lot faster, and while they do hold less, I've never drank out of a fancy teacup and not had my cup go cold. You also saw at the end of his essay how he talked about getting 20 cups of tea out of only 2 ounces of tea leaves. That shows you how during World War II, with the rationing, what they accepted.
Just tea, thank you.
So our next essay is called Tea by Douglas Adams.
Is there any tea on this spaceship?
This was first published on the 12th of May, 1999 on H2G2, which was a really fun website. It still exists online, but it kind of went by the wayside, and that makes me a little bit sad because this was one of these, it's like this wonderful artifact from the early days of the internet. It literally wanted to try to turn the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy into a real thing. And it had articles that were just sort of cheeky and fun. And so this is what Douglas Adams had to say about tea.
The suspense is killing me.
His death happened almost exactly 2 years after this essay was published, which means absolutely nothing. But, you know, as we all know, Douglas Adams was fond of improbabilities and coincidences. 1 or 2 Americans have asked me why it is that the English like tea so much, which never seems to them to be a very good drink. To understand, you have to know how to make it properly. There is a very simple principle to the making of tea, and it's this. To get the proper flavor of tea, the water has to be boiling, not boiled, when it hits the tea leaves. If it's merely hot, then the tea will be insipid. That's why we English have these odd rituals, such as warming the teapot first, so as not to cause the boiling water to cool down too fast as it hits the pot. And that's why the American habit of bringing a teacup, a tea bag, and a pot of hot water to the table is merely the perfect way of making a thin, pale, watery cup of tea that nobody in their right mind would want to drink. The Americans are all mystified about why the English make such a big thing out of tea, because most Americans have never had a good cup of tea. That's why they don't understand. In fact, the truth of the matter is that most English people don't know how to make tea anymore either, and that most people drink cheap instant coffee instead, which is a pity, and gives Americans the impression that the English are just generally clueless about hot stimulants. So, the best advice I can give to an American arriving in England is this. Go to Marks & Spencer and buy a packet of Earl Grey tea. Go back to where you're staying and boil a kettle of water. While it is coming to the boil, open the sealed packet and sniff. Careful. You may feel a bit dizzy, but this is in fact perfectly legal. When the kettle has boiled, pour a little of it into a teapot, swirl it around, and tip it out again. Put a couple, or 3, depending on the size of the pot, of tea bags into the pot. If I was really trying to lead you into the paths of righteousness, I would tell you to use free leaves rather than bags, but let's just take this in easy stages. Bring the kettle back up to the boil, and then pour the boiling water as quickly as you can into the pot. Let it stand for 2 or 3 minutes, and then pour it into a cup. Some people will tell you that you shouldn't have milk with Earl Grey, just a slice of lemon. Screw them, I like it with milk. If you think you will like it with milk, then it's probably best to put some milk into the bottom of the cup before you pour in the tea. This is socially incorrect. The socially correct way of pouring tea is to put the milk in after the tea. Social correctness has traditionally had nothing whatever to do with reason, logic, or physics. In fact, in England, it is considered socially incorrect to know stuff or think about things. It's worth bearing this in mind when visiting. If you pour milk into a cup of hot tea, you will scald the milk. If you think you will prefer it with a slice of lemon, well, add a slice of lemon. Drink it. After a few minutes, you will begin to think that the place you've come to isn't maybe quite so strange and crazy after all. So there's a lot of similarities there between Orwell's tea instructions and Douglas Adams. I would say the biggest difference is that Adams suggests getting Earl Grey as a first taste.
Earl Grey?
And Brits, I would love to hear from you on this. I think that if you were like introducing someone to a cuppa, then you would want an unflavored tea. But he recommends Earl Grey. It seems like he's more fond of the more aromatic teas. So yeah, I think we can argue about that one. So please do. When he mentioned the American thing of like a mug and then they bring the little pot with like lukewarm water.
I suppose I should have said it resembles tea.
My husband lived in America for 12 years before we moved back here, and we called this sad tea because it's so sad. You can't get anything decent from it. So if you know anyone who runs a restaurant, please, for the love of tea, tell them to stop. Where Orwell and Adams disagree is that Adams says, yes, do put the milk in the cup first. And he does acknowledge that's socially incorrect. My favorite line in this entire essay is, in England, it is generally considered socially incorrect to know stuff or think about things. No comment. I don't want to get in trouble with my neighbors. But yeah, so there's a big argument over that, which I would love for you to have an extremely civilized quarrel over. Douglas Adams had a rare gift, and I think the reason why his essays are worth giving to teenagers to read is the wit and the warmth and the way the humor just bubbles gently along. I think it's something that can really help kids hone their word choices in their own writing. And so if you want to find a way to just seamlessly inject humor into something, maybe not laugh out loud, although there's definitely laugh out loud moments in Adams's writing, but he manages to just sort of catch you off guard. He slips the humor in gently. And so you laugh involuntarily when you're not expecting it. And I think that's why his humor is so good.
Ah, yes, indeed, the tea. You must have a cup of tea.